friends, and welcome to What the Fringe, the podcast dedicated to all things Fringe theater. I'm your host, Lauren Hance. Each week, I visit with a Fringe artist to hear all about their endeavors and gain insight into their process. This week, I'm visiting with Kristi Boulton of The Underwear Fairy and Other Love Stories, also known as Unsolicited Good Advice Gone Dad, and her newest show, Felt Cute Might Overshare Later. What do you do when your most embarrassing stories are also your best ones? You get a puppet to tell them for you. Felt Cute Might Overshare Later is a solo comedy confessional where Kristi and her felt alter ego revisit a lifetime of cringeworthy, 100% true disasters, from childhood catastrophes to romantic misfires so spectacular they almost don't seem real. Funny, weird, and sneakily heartfelt. The puppet has no shame, the woman has plenty.
A Fringe audience is unlike any other theater audience because they want to support you. They want to support you bad. They are coming to your show because there is something about it that makes them go, ooh! And I just find that it's these tight communities. You're traveling with artists, you're meeting people from all over the world, you're being in these deeply vulnerable spaces because Fringe is, at its core, about experimentation and about play and about discovering what is at the fringe of these artistic spaces. It's just a really cool, really welcoming environment.
Kristi Boulton is a Hamilton and Toronto-based writer, comedian, and storyteller whose solo shows have earned critical praise, including 2 Critics' Choice Awards at Hamilton Fringe in 2024 and 2025. With a background in theater, podcasting, and digital media, Kristi blends sharp humor with heartfelt storytelling to create performances that are as funny as they are moving. She's performed across Canada, including the Edmonton Fringe, where her first one-woman show, The Underwear Fairy and Other Love Stories, gained a coveted 5-star review. She is always on the hunt for stories that connect audiences through laughter, love, and a little mystery. Kristi, welcome to What the Fringe!
Thank you for having me, Lauren. I'm so excited to be here.
I know, I'm so excited to have you on. So we met last year at the Edmonton Fringe, where you debuted that show there, yeah?
It was my second time performing it, but it was like my Edmonton Fringe debut.
And I loved it. And you were nominated for Best Storytelling from What the Fringe last year. So obviously I liked it.
I was so touched. I was like, I felt I was just moved. I was so thankful. So thank you for that.
It was a good storytelling show. It was really fun. And it's funny because, like, to be honest, I was like on the fence about coming to see the show. I was like, what do I think about this Underwear Fairy? Well, that's weird. What is that? Like, what kind of weird stuff is going to happen? And then I read the description and I was like, this sounds really good. It's like, it's one of those, like, and I say this in like a very positive way, like, can be a little conflicting for audiences, right? Like,
yes.
Do I want to hear about underwear? Do I not? Like, what's going on? And then it was this really delightful show, and we will get more into it a little bit later because I'll have you tell more about it because it's just fascinating. But yeah, you're a great storyteller.
Stop. So are you. Oh my goodness. The praise I've heard for Holy O is just like everybody just, that's the big thing that they always say about you is that you're this phenomenal storyteller who can take, you know, even the most spicy content and make it so accessible, which is so cool.
Thank you. That's so kind. That's very kind. It's been a fun show to work on. So let's get into you though. I see on your website that you call yourself a Jacqueline of all trades, which I think is super cute. And you've got this like large pool of stuff that you do. So where did you start learning about like loving performing? What was your first entry drug to the arts and then becoming this like Jacqueline of all trades?
Thank you. I like to say Jacqueline because I found that Jack just, you know, why was it only Jack who got to be in all the trades? I think like a lot of theater people, I have that like stereotypical answer where it's like, oh, it bit me young. Actually, one of the first things I ever did was my dad was a pastor when I was growing up for a lot of my life in the Anglican church. And he was all about like having performances at like Christmas times and, you know, Easters and all the big holidays. And being a boisterous, very boisterous child, I was always hand up first for wanting to, you know, take the solo in the choir or read the passages. And I think that's where it first bit me. And my mom was always a big performer. She was in the choir and like she did theater and she was very, very cool. In fact, she and I did the same part in Godspell about 20 years apart, which was very, very cool. I was Day by Day and also played Gilmer, who was the one with the puppet who did Learn Your Lessons Well my first time. And she did Day by Day. So that was very cool.
That's a good song. So you started getting into that and then you do improv, you sing, you perform, you do the digital, like you and I have that in common. You've done a lot of podcasting, you do marketing. So like what led you on that full journey? And I guess you studied theater in college. How did you get into all of that?
When I was in high school, I started doing the Sears Drama Festival. Anyone was in the Sears Drama Festival. My teacher also was Kathy Bergen. I'll give her a little shout out. She was the coolest, and she would always encourage a lot of us to try different things, and she wrote a couple of really great shows that we performed in these festivals, and because she was so lovely, she gave me this opportunity to look at theater in a brand new way and encouraged me to potentially pursue it. And that was partly because I really loved theater and also I didn't know what else to do with my life. But I put in my application to do some like big theater schools in Canada, but when it came to actually doing it, I chickened out. I was like really scared to pursue anything professionally. And love my dad. He's amazing. And this actually, I think, was good advice at the time because I was sort of undecided and I didn't know at the time. I was just looking for someone to blame for not doing it. I really wanted to pursue theater, but I was so scared. And he said, here's the thing. My dream for my kids is all of them go to post-secondary education and feel like they've pursued something that will help them feel stable and comfortable in their lives. It doesn't have to be the thing, but I'd love it if you're going to do theater, do something else as well, so that in case you change your mind about theater or in case for any reason like you find that it's a struggle, you have another skill set in your belt. So I went to school to McMaster for their theater and film program and also multimedia and communications with a minor in English. And doing that actually set me up in a way that I'd never expect to be able to take design work like graphic design, video, photo, all that jazz, and actually connect it through digital storytelling. And so I started making short films, I started doing podcasts, I started realizing that voice acting was something I could pursue. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't actually do any of that professionally until I was in my 30s, when my fiance at the time found a voice acting for video games class and was like, he just signed me up for it without telling me. I'd done community theater the whole time and like done a lot of like musical stuff in the background, been doing improv as like a bit of a hobby. And Mark, my lovely husband, was so sneaky and he signed me up and was like, you're not doing anything this weekend. You're going to go, you just book this weekend off. And that is what actually got me into my whole journey with doing voiceover and now having an agent and getting to do like a football campaign like I was in the Super Bowl in an ad, which was wild, and like video games and podcasting as a narrative form of podcasting and all these wonderful things. So it really was at the beginning very conventional and then became an unconventional journey. And I like to tell people now, like, you really don't know what you can do. And sometimes it takes someone giving you a little push to remind you that like you are capable.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And then because whenever I have people that have improv backgrounds, I'm like, how did you get into improv? Because I do improv as well. And so I always want to talk like just a teensy bit of shop, you know.
I am the biggest advocate for anyone who is ever like looking for something to boost their confidence, their public speaking. Even if you're not a performer, take an improv class. Put your children in improv classes. It is the best way, if you're an adult, just to rediscover play and to be silly and to like feel like you're at camp for adults. It teaches you how to trust yourself and to trust other people. And I got into it, like I actually was in high school, I was on the B team for improv every year. I've never quite gotten to the A team. And I was convinced I was not very good at improv for a number of years in university. And then I had some really lovely friends at the Staircase Theater here in Hamilton say, why don't you just come try improv again? Just come try it. I feel like, as a theater kid, you'll enjoy it. And I'd been watching people do improv for years. I was taking a lot of photography for the improvers at McMaster, but never doing it because I always had that fear that like I wasn't good enough. And then when I discovered it in Hamilton, it was this outstanding community of people who just embraced, because that's the beautiful thing about improvisers, is that it's not about competition, it's about trust. And so they pulled me in with like a wonderful, loving embrace. And from there, I discovered some really great friends and communities. And I started a troupe with a bunch of people called the Understudies. And we performed together for about 5 years, doing Hamilton Fringes and like kind of exploring musical improv together. And we went to Toronto to get some training at Second City. And that's how I discovered Second City in Toronto. And then from there, the Understudies, during the pandemic, we kind of took a hiatus that became a bigger break because all of us started doing other life stuff. And I started going more and more into Toronto and started playing with Bad Dog Theatre, which was an amazing experience. And then moving to Comedy Bar in Second City and doing their conservatory program and getting to perform there. And I just find that improv is a deep, deep source of joy. Again, if you're ever in a position where you feel as an artist like stuck, or you feel as a performer you're not quite sure where a show should go or like why you have this creative block, improv is this beautiful thing that lets you just clear your mind and be goofy. And it's so healthy too. And it doesn't have to be something that you perform every, Friday on stage. It can be something that is just a joyful thing to go and explore and meet people who are going to be the best folks around.
Yeah. There's just something fun to have the freedom to like get up in front of peers and fail miserably and not be judged. And I already know you're great. Okay, for like 5 minutes, you really sucked today. Like you didn't hit the mark. Who cares, And like, that's the way like it should be. And I love that. And then sometimes people, they hit the mark. I'm not trying to dwell on the not hitting the mark.
But that's totally it, right? Like, I think what is so integral about improv is it teaches you that failure is not the end all be all of your life. Like, we are so, especially as artists, failure is so terrifying. Being on display in the ways that we are, we're so vulnerable. We're out there putting our hearts on the stage and our hearts on our sleeves and our like everywhere. And yet improv teaches you that failure is not scary. It can feel a bit scary, but ultimately it is a part of learning. It is part of the journey, and you just get back up and you try again. And it's so powerful.
Well, and the beauty of community on top of that. Because we've got the motto, got your back. And before, like we always do a little circle. And then at the end, we all go around and pat each other on the back and say, got your back. And I mean, it's a ritualistic thing that we do, but it is the reminder of I'm here for you. And people get removed from our team if they're too prideful, if they don't play well with others. And it's not a talent thing. It's a personality thing. And usually we cut it off at when we're training, if they've got ego issues, like they're not going to be invited into the community because there's no room for it. And, that community aspect of like, we're all here together to do this together. And if you fail, I've got your back. And if I fail, it's just that give and take. And that is so beautiful about improv. I love it.
Yeah, that's what I feel like my musical improv troupe, Rats, another musical, which I'm doing the Hamilton Fringe with as well. It's the core of, I think, what makes me is like improv is such an integral part of my identity now because it reminds me every day that life is not to be taken so seriously. You're supposed to find the fun.
Yep. And it's so good. So good. Well, let's transition to talking about like Fringe, like what drew you to Fringe? Because I feel like there are some similar things like in the Fringe community of being there for each other that I find in Fringe that I don't necessarily find maybe in some other theater communities. So what drew you to that?
Years ago, because I have done, this is going to be my 17th or 18th Hamilton Fringe, which is wild. I took one off for the COVID year. I was in it with the Understudies, but then we decided to pull out because we were a bit nervous about improv on Zoom. So I discovered Fringe way back when I was in university still, years ago, and I had no idea what it was because Hamilton Fringe only started about 3 or 4, maybe 5 years before I was part of it. So it was quite tiny because Toronto had this giant fringe that was really like taking off. Montreal was already, deep in fringe, and Hamilton was like just a little baby. It was a little baby fringe. But that also gave it this really unique experience to kind of get in almost ground floory. And my first fringe experience was not fantastic. I won't name the show. Our director apologized to our audience for our first show because none of us had done fringe before. We went so over, they had to turn the lights out on us. It was bad. It was bad. And I was in the cast with my ex-boyfriend, and I hated it. He was hitting on all the other women, and I was like, this sucks. So that fringe, not the greatest, but what I did discover from that fringe, beyond the uncomfortableness of still being able to succeed, because our show ended up doing okay, in spite of, like, fringe is so supportive of its artists and its community. And that was the thing that I noticed above everything else. I remember being just, like, so beaten down by this experience in the first show because our tech had gone so crazy and none of us were trained in this, like, in the right way, and none of us knew what to expect. And yet, the fringe people were the best people. Because like an improv community, like you said, they were just like, hey, listen, you don't have to be polished. You don't have to be perfect. You guys are putting a show on, and that's an accomplishment. Let's celebrate that. And let's see what we can do to help you get there. And I remember just, like, talking to the artistic director at the time, just being like, thank you. That's very nice of you to do. That's very nice of you to say. And knowing that you had the support of the staff and the community, of the artists, and also, like, the audience, like, a fringe audience is unlike any other theater audience because they want to support you. They want to support you bad. They are coming to your show because there is something about it that makes them go, ooh. And I just find that it's these tight communities. You're traveling with artists. You're meeting people from all over the world. You're being in these deeply vulnerable spaces because fringe is at its core about experimentation and about play and about discovering what is at the fringe of these artistic spaces. It's just a really cool, really welcoming environment. And that first one, while chaotic, set the tone for the rest of my experiences. Like, I came back, which I could have just been like, never again. I'm never doing fringe again. This was horrible. But I kept coming back because every time I did, I realized that, like, they want you to succeed. No matter what's happening, fringe people want you to do well. And that is so special.
It is. Like, it's like the festival directors want you to do well. And the other artists want you to do well. I was so nervous coming into Fringe because my experience of theater in the US is very, it's just Broadway. You got the divas. There is this very, like, competitive mentality. And I was like, oh gosh, is this what and I got there and it was like everybody just wants everybody else to do well. There's like this handful of people who might not, and I feel like they don't really last in the fringe arena because it's so hard and it's a hustle. And, like, I love shouting out shows. I love doing that. I mean, I love going, like, at Edmonton, Marie was like, go talk to people, but I'll stand up there. And the first thing, instead of pitching my show, I'm like, hey, how's it going? Great. Are you trying to find a show? Yeah. What are you into? And they'll be, I like this kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, great. You should go see this show. And, like, I'll tell them to go see other shows, and, like, that is a very kind of normal way for people to be in Fringe. And then you are out there hustling your show as well. And then, of course, you're like, and you should consider mine. But it is this very lovely, sweet community. And it is that, like, permission to fail also that is in improv, right? It's like, okay, you had a bad show. It's like, I have talked to so many fringers that have been doing this for a long time, and they all have that show that was like, oh man, that was so bad. And they're like amazing performers. And you're like, oh, okay, you had a bad show. Okay, Who cares? Well, let's talk about some of your shows. So your solo shows, we've got the Underwear Fairy, which I've seen, and then your new show that's coming out this year, Cute Might Overshare Later. They're both storytelling shows based in a lot of your own experiences, but it's not a trauma dump. Like your show it's very theatrical. I mean, the one that I saw, and it's telling. Underwear Fairy, we'll get to in a second because it's very interesting. But talk to me about like your desire to share all of these personal stories in all these kind of unconventional ways. What is the drive behind that?
I have found that for a lot of my life, I mean, I was a late diagnosed ADHD actually, so a little bit of autism in there. And I found that I've always been an oversharer, and I used to leave whatever room I left feeling deeply uncomfortable that I might have overshared, that I might have gone too far. And you know what? Probably the other people thought so too a little bit. At one point I thought, well, I think these stories that I'm telling people in the moment, I think they're hilarious. And, you know, they're all learning experiences for me. And that's a very ADHD thing, is you're listening to someone talk and then you'll be like, that reminds me of something that happened to me, because you're trying to empathize. And I realized that through all of these stories, I was trying to empathize with people. And I was trying to tell them, I get it. I know. I understand. And I realized through that I just really wanted to connect with people at a core level. And every experience I brought up was me seeking connection. And through that, I realized I also had a lot of shame attached to some of these stories, because I felt like maybe they were embarrassing or they were a little traumatic sometimes. But I always felt a little bit better having told them, because it disseminated that shame. It kind of like dissociated me away from the shame of it when people laughed or when they said, oh God, that sounds like something that happened to me. And through doing that, I thought, this is very human. And that's all I ever want, is to feel connected to people. So why not make some money doing it? It was also that I liked the process of talking to people and them going, oh, me too. And I realized that part of what makes us human is transferring shame, and that glorious timeline where it becomes from shame to hilarious. And you can only do that by talking about it. That's the beauty of it. Same thing with Holy O. Like, you have to talk about these things so that the stigma is removed. And so with Felt Cute, it's like a quote-unquote trauma dump, but it's not a trauma dump. It's me saying, these used to be really horrible, embarrassing stories for me. And while they still retain that embarrassment, because it's like, oh God, what was I thinking? It's also about saying, I've gotten to the point where it's hilarious now. And let's share in that delightful cringe together. Because my hope, and this is something going back to my theater school teacher back in high school, Kathy Bergen used to say, the thing that I want most after I've had people come and see a play that I've done or a production I've produced is I want them to go out and have a cup of coffee and talk about it. And to me, that's what I'm trying to achieve with every show. I want you to go out and have a fun conversation after, whether it's about my show or something that inspired a conversation, like an embarrassing story that happened to you. Like some of mine that I'm touching on are the first time I got real drunk and ended up making out with my crush in a closet and then puking on him.
Those are the kinds of stories we want to hear. Like, we want to hear those. That's why, like, the moth and storytelling, like, that's funny. It's funny. And it's not centered around, like, some dramatic thing that happened to you. What are some other stories? Yeah.
The first time I went on stage, and not to spoil too much, but I peed my pants. There's another one about a boyfriend that I had that I teased in Underwear Fairy and never actually went back to. And the only reason I didn't go back to it in Underwear Fairy is because as I was writing, I forgot. Thanks, ADHD. I had a couple of people come and be like, what happened with the guy with the fire ants? And I was like, I forgot I talked about that. That's actually what started Underwear Fairy. I talked about my dad and I had a joke in it being like, but that's a whole other story about him going from being a priest to an atheist. And then I thought, oh, That is a whole other story. There goes unsolicited. Good advice gone bad. With Felt Cute, I try to keep it as light as possible. As I'm writing it and I'm workshopping it, there's one story in there that is quite vulnerable. But that's how I tell my stories. I like to raise you up and make it fun, but I also like to add one story that's a little hard to tell, simply because at the core of my storytelling, again, with that empathy, I want to remind people that it's safe to talk about the tough stuff and that life is meant to be joyful and bright, but it's okay to be vulnerable and to share those moments. And that's a really big thing for me in storytelling, is like, I want most of it to be bright and cheerful, but I also want you to recognize that there is safety in being vulnerable in that way. So I have one story that I'm workshopping in there about an ex that was not great. And I never name him, but I also recognize he's a human. And so I try to, again, see the human side of that as well. And then we go back to the comedy. So for me, that was why Underwear Fairy had the flow it did. It's because it is a dark story that we can talk about. But with Felt Cute, I want people to laugh more than I want them to go, but I also want that sound effect coming out of them.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, it is such a cute, funny pun on Felt Cute. Might overshare later instead of like Felt Cute, might delete later. Like, it's just, there's and the puppet and everything. Like, I just think that sounds so fun. Have you done puppetry work before, or what led you to do that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Puppetry is my other little side passion. I actually loved puppets from a very young age, but then I discovered Avenue Q, the musical, and loved that. And I was the first Canadian Kate Monster in Avenue Q.
Yes, Queen. I love that. Of course you were Kate Monster.
She's my fave. And I played her recently again in Hamilton production. I got to be Kate again. And she's like, if I could play any role for the rest of my life, it would be Kate Monster in Avenue Q. That was at HTI, which is the Hamilton Community Theater, and I fell back in love with puppetry. And it reminded me that, like, what's so great about puppets is they suspend your disbelief. Like, I grew up watching the Muppets. I'm sure you did too. We love the Muppets. And I realized that with Felt Cute, I had this cool opportunity to tell these stories that I would normally never reveal because they're so silly. But I thought, you know what would be a great way to do that is through a puppet version of myself who has no shame. Because if anything, being vulnerable, it's like an escapism because you stop seeing the person. If they're a good puppeteer, you don't see them. You see the puppet. And the puppet, she doesn't care.
The puppets get to say all the things that humans don't get to say. They get away with saying all the things because they're puppets. They're cute and they get to. So I'm excited for this show because I've been promising it all episode. And give us the 30-second overview of Underwear Fairy, because I have to ask, have we discovered yet?
So Underwear Fairy, I'm actually considering changing the title. Someone gave me some really great advice to call it the Underwear Thief instead of the Underwear Fairy, because that's what we called it in my family, was the Underwear Fairy, because it took away the terrifying stigma of what this person was doing in my house. The Underwear Fairy and Other Love Stories is a story about, at its core, love. And throughout my childhood, my mom passed away when I was quite young, when I was 12, from cancer. And she left an indelible mark on my life that always choose love, always choose joy. She was the reason I love fun and color and bright. And when she passed away, I had never had the period talk with anybody. So when I got my first period, I didn't know what to do with it. I was at school. It was so scary. And I ran home and hid my underwear in my underwear drawer and shoved it at the back because my dad had taught us how to do laundry ourselves because he was working nights at that point after my mom had passed. And we grew up really fast, and he was a great dad, which is why I wrote a whole show about him. But in this scenario, I knew I could get the underwear hidden when we did laundry as a big, as a family laundry day on the weekend. And when I went to go get that underwear on the weekend, it had disappeared. And it was replaced with all these pairs of children's white cotton panties. And for years, this continued. Every couple of months, I would come home from school, I'd look, and I'd have underwear replaced. And I thought it was my dad for the longest time. And the underlying story of the show is discovering who this person was, because it wasn't my dad.
And it wasn't your sister. It wasn't your family members.
Exactly. I have a theory as to who it was, but I keep that private just in case. The story itself, though, is that it's interspersed with stories of, like, love stories throughout my life. Like, my high school best friend who I, didn't realize I, was bisexual at the time, but had funny feelings about when we went skinny dipping. Other loves that had happened, and like the guy with swords in the basement. That's a funny story. Poor Boris. Boris found out about the show and texted me during my tech run the first time. We hadn't talked in years, and he messaged me and was like, "Hey, so am I in your story?" I was like, "Oh my god, yes, but you come off really well, I promise." But it is also discovering, like, the Underwear Fairy haunted me for a really long time. And the reason it was my first ever one-woman show was because I realized I'd been living in fear of this person, this entity, whoever they were, because they'd found me even when I was in my 30s, and it was wild. But I thought, why am I so ashamed of this? Like, this is uncomfortable, but at the same time, this is a unique, wild story. And it has the potential to touch people in a way that, like, because of how I've processed it, because of how I've moved through it. And I do have one regret, is that I did not talk to my sister, who was also affected, before putting on the production. Because years ago we talked about it, and she had been like, yeah, let's, if you ever feel the need to talk about it publicly, you can. But otherwise, like, for me, it was like, this is my story. And it's weird, and it's strange, and it's a little scary, but also, at the core of it, I've discovered how to forgive this person, and how to move through life even when you have trauma, like the loss of a mom young, or figuring out your sexuality when you're younger, or like going through various trauma, having someone come into your house and steal your underwear and, get upset when you buy a red thong. Ultimately, it's just about that human experience that, like, no matter what weird, crazy things happen to us, we have the power to choose love. And that's ultimately what I think I try to drive through most of my shows.
Like, there's just this theme that we've talked about today, which really circles back to choosing love with improv and with storytelling and with fringe, of choosing to love other people despite all of their flaws and their, misgivings and their beauty. It's really cool. So thank you for sharing with that, because I was teasing on that. But there's that similarity of, you felt shame around this thing, and I could understand why. And now you've got felt cute might overshare later. Again, shame around these experiences. And I think that's something we can all identify with, of whether it's something that we did get drunk and throw up on the boyfriend or whatever, or something that was done to us. Like, most people don't experience people sneaking into their house and swapping out their underwear. But how beautiful that you were able to see it's an act of love and an act of compassion, and it kind of sounds like who you are defines who you are as a person and who you are as a storyteller and a performer. So
thank you. And I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think it's a big part of, like, what you do as a storyteller too, is that everybody has a secret. But do those secrets need to define us, or can they become a part of our story in a way that doesn't have to be a secret? Like, don't get me wrong, if you have little secrets that you want to keep forever for you, and that's, like, great, everybody has those, but why attach ourselves and our identities to these pieces of shame when they could be pieces of us as a story that we don't have to hide in the shadows? Like, who's telling you that that has to be a shadow moment?
We can have a whole nother podcast about that. But we're reaching our time, so we'll put a little pin in that for another day. But I'll ask you my last famous question, which is, what is your most interesting or awkward or heartfelt fringe interaction? We've already talked about your most awkward life interaction, but let's talk about fringe.
So I actually did tell a story about this in a Hamilton storytelling experience, because it was so defined for me, of a moment of like, oh my God. But when I was at a fringe festival years ago, I remember, and this is when I still hadn't identified that I might also be into women, I remember sitting with my cast of a show I had written and produced, and I was really excited about it. And like, that was my focus, was that I was in on making sure they were okay. It was the preview night. And then I remember looking up and just locking eyes with the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen in my entire life. And it was like, all of a sudden, it did that thing where the world got a little hazy, and I was just like, and I did not feel this about women normally, or I'd shoved it down. Like, I didn't think about it, I'd shoved it right down. And so, as she was leaving, I saw her going, her and her cast were about to go out and do their preview piece, and I, being a naturally awkward person, went, "Excuse me!" and like just ran at her. I don't know what compelled me to just do that. I don't know what tugged me, but I ran. I went, "Excuse me, I'm so sorry. You are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in the world." Like, could not, barely audible, so weird. And she looked at me and went, "Oh my God, I actually thought the same thing about you." And then she like touched my hand and went, "Find me later." And I was like, but you know what? I didn't. For the entire festival, I was so scared that I completely avoided her. Absolutely, like, just could not look her in the face. I was just like, "Oh my God, what am I doing? What is happening?" I'm even getting red on camera, like, talking about it, because I was, like, so embarrassed. And then the final night of Fringe after the awards ceremony, she walks into the bar that I'm in, and I was just like, this is my moment. This is my time. I have to say something. But I went up to her and I was just like, "Hey, remember me?" And she was real drunk and tried to kiss me, and I panicked again and was like, "Just give me 1 second, stay here. Just give me 1 second." I ran into the bathroom, full blown like panic mode, just being like, all right, Kristi. You're gonna kiss a girl. You're gonna kiss a girl. It's gonna be great. You're gonna do it. You're gonna kiss a girl. You're gonna love it. And I popped a mint in my mouth and was like, "You got this." And there was someone else in the bathroom. Not great for my ego. Ran back out, and she was making out with a guy. And I missed my moment, but it was the moment that made me realize privately for myself, I could have been straighter. Probably. Might not be as straight as I thought I was. I've seen her on Instagram, and like we ended up chatting and becoming like, you know, Fringe friends, you know, the friends that you really like to see at Fringe, and you always support each other and uplift each other. But I still sometimes think about that. And it was going to be in Felt Cute, but I had to cut it for time. But it was the moment that both haunts me and elevates me. But I don't think I've ever been so awkward. I literally did not know how to speak to her. I was like, "You're the most beautiful person in the world." Like, I understood dumb men in that moment. I understood dumb dudes who go up to you and they're like, "Hey, beautiful, you want a beer?" Like, that's how I felt. I was just like, blah, blah, blah. My tongue is 10 pounds and I'm an idiot.
That's so great.
Yeah, never thought I'd identify with dumb dudes, but here we were.
Yeah, but that was the day. That was the day. Well, Kristi, it's been so good to have you on today. Thank you for sharing all your lovely stories. I appreciate it.
Thank you. This was so awesome. I really appreciate being here.
All right. Well, you can catch Kristi at the Hamilton Fringe this July in Felt Cute Might Overshare Later, and her musical improv show, East Side Story, with her troupe Rats, another musical. And you can find Kristi online at kristiboulton.com and keep up with her on Instagram at kristi.boulton and on TikTok at stories_with_Kristi. What the Fringe is produced and hosted by me, Lauren Hantz. This episode was edited by Ben Ellis of Renowned Media, and those sweet tunes you hear are provided by Paul Snyder of Orchestra of Sound. And our logo was designed by Ruby Arnold of Ruby Makes Things. What the Fringe can be found on your favorite podcast platforms and on YouTube. So be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know when new episodes release. And keep up with What the Fringe on Instagram at whatthefringe_productions, and find us online at whatthefringeproductions.com. We all have that Fringe artist that we're a little starry-eyed over, and if we ever get a chance to meet them, we're either tongue-tied or we're like, "I love you so much, and here's why, blah, 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 blah." And then an hour later, we're like,
I left feeling deeply uncomfortable that I might have overshared.